In Naples, pizza was a birthright. Thin, blistered, cooked in 90 seconds by a man whose grandfather did the same. In London, in Paris, in Rome, Europeans grew up believing there was one correct answer to the question of what pizza should be, and America simply hadn't gotten the memo. To them, American pizza wasn't a variation. It was a mistake wearing the same name. Too thick, too much cheese, too far from anything a real pizzaiolo would sign his name to. Then they tried it. Not the tourist trap slice near the hotel, but the real version. The one locals actually ate. And something quieter than surprise set in. The crust wasn't wrong, it was different, built for a different hand and a different hunger. The cheese wasn't excess, it was engineering. Piece by piece, the case for cheap copy started falling apart, replaced by a question none of them had expected to ask. What if this was never an imitation to begin with? What they were tasting, without knowing it, was a version of pizza, and no other country had bothered to build. One shaped by immigration laws, steel factories, delivery deadlines, and 100 small decisions Naples never had to make. Nobody in Europe had taught America how to make pizza. America had simply gone further than anyone thought to ask.
What is this?
It's pizza.
I think I've just found pizza better in America than in Italy.
Guys, look at the sizes of the pizzas.
So this is my first New York pizza.
Chris! I know, it's my dream. I had goosebumps everywhere.
Was it good?
Why does a country with no pizza tradition end up with a pizza law? Not a recipe, not a custom, an actual statute written into fire codes dictating what kind of flame is allowed to touch a pizza. That question alone should have told Europeans something was different here. Naples never needed a law for its ovens. New York did. The story starts in 1905 in a tenement kitchen on Spring Street with an Italian immigrant named Gennaro Lombardi selling tomato pies wrapped in paper to men who missed home more than they missed anything else. He didn't set out to reinvent pizza. He set out to survive in a city that had never seen it, using a coal-fired oven because that was what New York tenements had, not because Naples had taught him to use one. Wood was scarce and expensive in a city built on coal. The fuel source alone was already a fork in the road, a decision made not by taste, but by what the city had on hand. Then the fires started. Tenement fires tore through New York in the early 20th century with a regularity that terrified city officials, and coal ovens, hot, unregulated, packed into wooden buildings, became a target. By the 1930s, several cities had moved to restrict or ban coal-fired ovens outright for new businesses. Any pizzeria opening after the law took effect had to switch to gas. Any pizzeria that already existed before the law, Lombardi's among them, was allowed to keep burning coal under what's now called a grandfather clause, a legal exception, not a culinary one. To this day, the handful of coal oven pizzerias still operating in New York aren't preserving a recipe. They're the surviving edge of a regulation. This is the part that unravels the cheap copy verdict before any of the other facts even arrive. American pizza didn't diverge from Naples because someone got the recipe wrong. It diverged because an entire generation of Italian immigrants was cooking inside a legal and material system that Naples never had to answer to. Fuel scarcity picked the oven. Fire codes picked the exceptions. Tenement geography picked the size of the ovens, the layout of the kitchens, even how thick the dough needed to be to survive a longer, less controlled bake. None of it was imitation. All of it was adaptation under constraints nobody in Italy was working around. And the adaptation didn't stop with one city or one decision. Every wave of the same pressure, immigrants rebuilding a memory with whatever materials the law and the landscape allowed, when it pushed American pizza further from its starting point, one regulation, one oven type, one supply shortage at a time. By the time pizza spread out of New York into Chicago into New Haven, into 100 towns that had never seen a pizzeria before, it wasn't carrying a blueprint anymore. It was carrying 100 separate answers to the same question. How do you rebuild something sacred with none of the original tools. That's the quiet reversal sitting underneath every slice Europeans dismissed as inferior. They weren't tasting a failed attempt at Naples. They were tasting the result of immigrants solving a problem Naples never had to solve, and solving it well enough that a law had to be written just to let a few of them keep doing it the old way. A cheap copy doesn't earn its own legal exception. A cheap copy doesn't survive a century of fire codes built specifically around it. What Lombardi's oven really proves is simple, and it's the thing every European who mocked American pizza never stopped to ask. If this were truly just a bad imitation, why would a city ever bother writing a law to protect it? Why does Detroit, a city built on car parts, not flour, end up with one of the most distinctive pizzas in America? Not despite the factories, because of them. Detroit-style pizza doesn't look like anything Naples would recognize, and it isn't supposed to. It's square, not round. The cheese runs edge to edge, caramelized against the pan into a lace of crisp, blackened cheese called frico. The sauce goes on top, in stripes, after the bake. Every rule that governs a Neapolitan pie gets broken here, and none of it was a stylistic choice. It was a supply chain accident. In the years after World War II, Detroit was the automotive capital of the world, and its factories didn't just produce cars, they produced offcuts. Blue steel trays, the kind used to hold small parts and tools on assembly lines, were everywhere. Cheap, durable, and built to survive heat and repeated use without warping. When a former Navy man named Gus Guerra started making pizza in his Detroit bar in the late 1940s, he didn't order pans from a restaurant supplier. He grabbed what the city already had lying around, the same steel trays sitting in auto shops a few blocks away. That single substitution changed everything downstream. A steel tray conducts heat differently than a round pizza stone or a thin aluminum pan. It holds it, concentrates it, drives it up the sides. Push dough into a rectangular steel tray and let it rise there. And you get a crust that's thick, airy in the middle, and fried crisp along every edge where the dough meets hot metal. That's not a technique someone invented at a stove. That's a technique the pan invented for them. This is the pattern that outlives Detroit and explains something bigger about American pizza as a whole. Almost every regional style in this country can be traced back to whatever industrial material happened to be sitting nearby when someone needed a container. Chicago's deep dish came out of pans built for other kitchen uses entirely, repurposed by cooks who weren't chasing tradition, just working with what was on the shelf. St. Louis got a paper-thin, cracker-like crust shaped by a locally dominant processed cheese product, not a technique passed down from anywhere. None of these cities set out to build a style. They built a workaround, and the workaround became identity. That's the divide Europeans never accounted for. In Naples, the oven and the pan were fixed points, refined over generations, treated as sacred enough that deviation was considered a failure. In America, the pan was never sacred. It was just whatever the local economy had extra of, and the pizza adapted to the tool, not the other way around. A country that mass-produces everything doesn't just mass-produce cars and steel trays. It accidentally mass-produces new cuisines out of the leftovers. So the question worth sitting with is this: if a nation with zero pizza heritage can still generate an entirely original, technically coherent style just from the industrial scraps lying around one city, what does that say about how pizza actually gets invented? Not from centuries of refinement. Sometimes just from a bar owner in Detroit, reaching for the nearest steel tray and accidentally starting a tradition that a factory line built before he ever touched dough. No pizza in Naples has ever been designed around a stopwatch. American pizza has, and the countdown didn't start in a kitchen. It started in a car. In 1960, a college dropout named Tom Monahan bought a single failing pizza shop in Ypsilanti, Michigan, with his brother for $500 they didn't really have. What he inherited wasn't a recipe worth protecting. It was a struggling store with no reputation, competing against pizzerias that already had loyal customers and better ovens. Monahan couldn't win on taste alone, not yet. So he decided to compete on something no one else was even measuring: time. By the 1970s, that idea had a name: 30 minutes or free, and it turned Domino's into a logistics company that happened to sell pizza. But a promise like that doesn't survive contact with reality unless the product itself gets rebuilt to serve it. A Neapolitan-style pie, thin and delicate, falls apart the moment it's stacked in a car and driven across town. The steam has nowhere to go, the crust turns to paste, the toppings slide. Domino's couldn't sell that pizza and keep that promise. So the pizza changed instead. The dough got thicker, engineered to hold structure through 20 minutes of vibration and heat without collapsing. The box got a corrugated design with strategic airflow, built specifically to let steam escape without letting the pizza go soggy. A problem regular flat boxes never solved because they were never asked to survive a car ride. Delivery bags got insulated linings that trapped heat without trapping moisture. A balance that took years of trial and error most customers never noticed because it worked. None of this came from a chef's instinct about flavor. It came from an engineer's instinct about failure points. This is the detail that separates American pizza from almost every other cuisine on Earth. It's one of the only major foods anywhere that was substantially redesigned around the demands of transportation rather than the demands of taste. Naples built a pizza to be eaten in 90 seconds standing at the oven at peak heat. America built a pizza to survive 30 minutes in a stranger's car, arrive intact, and still taste like it just came out of an oven it never touched in the customer's presence. Those are two completely different engineering problems, and only one country ever tried to solve the second one. And the ripple effect didn't stop at Domino's. Once the delivery model proved it could work at scale, it forced every competitor into the same redesign logic. Pizza Hut, Papa John's, and eventually thousands of independent shops, all quietly optimizing crust thickness, box ventilation, and cheese to sauce ratios for a 15 to 30 minute journey nobody in Italy ever had to plan for. An entire national cuisine got shaped by delivery route math. There's a quieter irony sitting underneath all of it, too. The 30 minutes or free guarantee that built this whole system was eventually retired, not because the standard failed, but because it worked too well, and the accidents it caused on the road made the promise legally and morally impossible to keep. What survived wasn't the guarantee. It was everything the guarantee had already forced into existence. The box, the bag, the dough built to travel. So when a European bites into a delivery pizza in an American suburb and dismisses it as a lesser version of the real thing, they're missing what they're actually eating. That pizza was never trying to be the version made in Naples. It was solving a problem Naples never had. How do you keep a fresh baked meal fresh after it leaves the person who baked it? Nobody in Italy had to answer that question. In America, an entire industry got built around answering nothing else. There's a number that's been quietly tracking the cost of living in New York City for decades, and it has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. It's the price of a plain slice. The pattern first got noticed almost by accident. Economists comparing New York subway fares against the price of a plain cheese slice across several decades found something strange. The two numbers moved together, almost in lockstep, for years at a time. When the subway fare went up, the slice price tended to follow within a reasonable window. It wasn't a coincidence anyone had engineered, no pricing board, no formal index. It was two markets responding to the same underlying pressure, the cost of operating a small, low-margin business in one of the most expensive cities on Earth, whether that business moved people or fed them. Both a subway ride and a dollar slice share a specific kind of economic DNA. Both are priced for volume, not margin. A slice shop survives by selling hundreds of them a day at a price low enough that almost nobody has to think twice before buying one. That means the price of a slice is unusually sensitive to the exact same costs, squeezing every small operator in the city: flour, rent, labor, gas, insurance. When those costs climb, a slice shop has almost no room to absorb the hit quietly. The price has to move, and it has to move soon, because the margin was never built to hide inflation for long. That sensitivity is exactly what makes it useful. Official inflation numbers arrive late, aggregated across categories that mean little to an actual household, smoothed until the sharp edges disappear. A dollar slice doesn't wait for a government report. It reflects flour costs, fuel costs, and rent increases in close to real time, in a price tag any pedestrian can read without opening a spreadsheet. For years, that made it something close to a folk economic indicator, a number New Yorkers tracked instinctively long before anyone gave it a name. In recent years, though, the two numbers have started drifting apart. slice prices have climbed faster than Subway fares, breaking a correlation that held for the better part of 30 years. That divergence is its own signal, arguably a more important one. It means food costs are outrunning transit costs in a way the old index never anticipated, squeezing the exact households that relied on both being cheap and predictable. When the thing that used to double as an informal inflation gauge stops behaving the way it always did, that's not the index failing. That's the index doing its job, telling you something changed before the official numbers admit it. This is what makes the cheap copy verdict feel almost absurd in hindsight. A food Europeans dismissed as a downgrade turned into something no dish in Naples has ever been. A live, street-side instrument for reading the financial pressure on an entire city's working class. Nobody engineered pizza to do that. The price simply couldn't hide from the same forces squeezing rent, wages, and everything else. And because a slice is cheap enough to buy without a second thought, millions of people ended up checking that instrument every single day without realizing that's what they were doing. So the next time someone in New York grabs a dollar slice without thinking twice about the price, they're reading a number that took decades to become meaningful, one that moved with Subway fares for a generation, then broke from them, and in doing so quietly recorded exactly how the cost of living in America's densest city has shifted under everyone's feet. Ask a commercial real estate lender which small business they'd rather bet on, a trendy new restaurant or a pizza shop, and the answer isn't close. It's not about the food, it's about the math. Small restaurants fail at a brutal rate in America, and the ones that fail fastest tend to share a common flaw: thin margins paired with unpredictable, trend-dependent demand. A concept restaurant can be full on Friday and empty on Tuesday dependent on reviews, seasons, and whatever the neighborhood is currently excited about. Lenders who evaluate small business loans know this pattern intimately because they're the ones who eat the loss when it happens. Pizza breaks that pattern almost completely, and it does it for reasons that have nothing to do with taste. A pizza shop's demand curve is about as flat and predictable as food service gets. People order pizza on a Tuesday the same way they order it on a Saturday. For a kid's practice night, a office lunch, a family too tired to cook, a game on TV. That steadiness shows up directly in the numbers lenders actually look at. Consistent weekly revenue, low ingredient cost relative to price, and a business model that doesn't require constant reinvention to stay relevant. When the Small Business Administration and private lenders evaluate loan applications for food service, pizzerias post default rates lower than most other restaurant categories, specifically because the revenue is boring in the best possible way. That predictability changes where pizza shops end up physically. Commercial landlords leasing space in suburban strip malls aren't just picking tenants who'll pay rent, they're picking tenants who'll still be paying rent in 5 years because a strip mall with rotating vacancies loses value fast, and every empty storefront drags down the perceived stability of the ones next to it. A pizza shop with its unusually low failure rate functions as a kind of anchor tenant even when it isn't the biggest unit in the plaza. Landlords will sometimes offer a new pizzeria a better rate than a flashier concept, not out of sentiment, but because the actuarial odds favor the plain cheese pie over almost anything else on the menu. That single fact ripples outward into something most people never connect to pizza at all: property valuation. A strip mall with a stable, long-tenured anchor tenant supports a higher appraised value than one with high turnover, because appraisers price in the predictability of future rent, not just the current rent roll. In a real, measurable way, the presence of a boring, reliable pizza shop can quietly support the financing terms on the entire commercial property around it. The nail salon next door, the insurance office 2 units down, all borrowing a little stability from a business selling $4 slices. That's the part no one in Naples could have predicted because it was never possible there. In a country where a slice of pizza can influence a bank's risk model and a landlord's leasing strategy, pizza stopped being just a meal a long time ago. It became infrastructure, the kind of steady, unglamorous asset that entire local economies quietly lean on without ever noticing they're leaning. So when a tourist walks past yet another pizza shop in yet another strip mall and shrugs it off as unremarkable, they're missing the real story sitting in plain sight. That boring pizzeria isn't just surviving. In the eyes of a lender, a landlord, and an appraiser, it might be the most trustworthy business on the block. 5 facts, and not one of them was ever about flavor. A fire code, a steel tray, a stopwatch, a subway fare, a loan application. None of that belongs in a conversation about authentic pizza, and yet all of it is exactly why American pizza exists in the form it does. It wasn't copied, it was built under pressure, out of whatever the country happened to have on hand. Maybe that's the real difference between the two places. Naples had the luxury of time, centuries to refine one correct answer and defend it. America never had that luxury. It had immigrants improvising, with someone else's oven, cities burning down around bad decisions, a delivery promise that rewired an entire product, and an economy that turned a $4 slice into something closer to a barometer. Under that kind of pressure, there's no room to copy anything. There's only room to solve the next problem in front of you. So maybe the real question was never which pizza is better. Maybe it's this: how many other things has this country quietly rebuilt from scratch? Not because it was chasing someone else's original, but because it never had one to chase in the first place.